I think we've all done it. You go out to the shops to buy one specific item and then you end up buying all manner of things and filling your basket up with other purchases. Or sometimes it's exactly the opposite. I go shopping fully intending to buy something and then actually I come home empty-handed. So what is it about the customer journey that can cause these different outcomes? That's what we're going to tackle as we navigate digital payments.
Welcome to the Navigating Digital Payments podcast, brought to you by Worldline, bringing you the latest innovations, trends, and predictions about the future of payments.
Hello and welcome to this episode of Navigating Digital Payments. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm David Daly. I look after the Discovery Hub here at Worldline, and for this episode I'm delighted to be joined by Frank Rosick, who is the Head of Digital Trust Solutions at Proximus. Frank, welcome to the podcast.
Hi David, Nina. Pleasure being with you today.
Thank you very much for joining us. And yes, we also have our regular podcast guest, Ina Kostiuk, who is the Global Partner Manager for the Merchant Services part of the Worldline business, again with us today. Hi, Ina. Welcome back to Navigating Digital Payments.
Hello, David. Hello, Frank. Happy to join, as always.
Great to have you here, Ina. So later, I really want to have a view from both of you on what leads to these different outcomes when people go shopping. What makes someone just browse for the whole day, or what makes someone convert to someone who's buying lots of things? But before we do that, I thought it'd be good to take a step back and talk a little bit more or understand more about this concept of omni-channel and what factors are really key to making omni-channel work. So Frank, maybe I could come to you first, because obviously this idea of omni-channel has been around for a while. But for people who are not so familiar with it, how would you explain it in really simple terms?
So omni-channel means that you look at a customer journey and have interconnected channels. So customers will shop in store, as you alluded to, but also through their smartphone, online, at home, increasingly in other universes like the metaverse. And omni-channel is a system where these are interconnected, so you can seamlessly move from one to the other during your journey as a client. And the different channels will also know what you have been doing. So concretely speaking, if I walk into a shop and I give them my name, they will know who I am and what my history is, and they'll be able to help me better. That, in a nutshell, is omni-channel.
Thanks, Frank. That's a really clear explanation. And why, in your view, then, does omni-channel matter? What's its significance?
Well, it has a clear impact. On one hand, studies clearly show that clients who shop omni-channel consume up to 3 times more. Actually, 75% plus of clients use multiple channels to go shopping. And overall, there is what you call a higher client lifetime value and higher returning rates of clients who are basically in an omni-channel environment. So that's a very, very tangible impact when it comes to the client. It creates more convenience. And I always say convenience is everything that this is about. Another important factor is about the companies who offer omni-channel experience. Here, numbers show that companies who have a superior client experience generate up to 5.7 times more revenue than other companies, and their profitability tends to be 60% higher. So clearly, omni-channel has a tangible impact.
Yes, my research actually quite confirm your numbers as well. I will share a bit later for the retail pieces on our side of the business. But I just want to clarify one thing, that we also hear the different terms like multi-channel and opti-channel. Are they the same? Are they different from omni-channel?
Actually, I'll start with multi-channel. Multi-channel is actually an offer by a company who has different channels, but these channels are not interconnected. So how often would actually, to come back to my prior example, a client walk into a shop after having browsed online and in a space where the client is identified and nobody in the shop actually knows who they are and what their desires are. So when you have separate channels, this is multi-channel, and you leave a lot of value on the table because it creates a lot of client frustration. So like if you would surf on your phone and then on your computer and nothing is remembered on both sides, you have to restart from zero. Okay, that's multi-channel. And in my mind, it's a fairly outdated concept. Okay, today there's no excuse to practice this. So opti-channel is actually an extension of omni-channel. So here client usage is basically used to kind of focus the client's experience on the preferred client channels, right? And sometimes also basically enriched in data is used, i.e. not the client's data, but similar person's data is used to say, okay, this is usually how these people want to serve, so we will orient them towards a channel that are either most convenient or most frequently used by them. And it's kind of, the purpose is to help fluidity, basically. Mm-hmm.
So omni-channel is providing multiple channels and a seamless shift between them. Opti-channel is trying to be more actively steering a consumer to what is likely to be the best channel for them for a particular activity?
That's exactly the point. It's according to the client's profile and the circumstances the client in. Opti-channel in this omni-channel environment will guide the client, steer him or her to what seems to be the best solution to what they're looking for. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Thanks for clarifying that. So in a moment, I really want to come on to some of the challenges that exist when providing these kind of omni-channel, opti-channel experiences. But first, maybe Ina, I can come to you to see what you've seen happening in this area.
Let's start with 2 years back when we got all into the COVID pandemic, and suddenly everybody started not just to buy online, to do more things online. And of course, merchants, they actually been pushed to respond to the client's needs. So that's how the omni-channel and opti-channel started to grow and appears. It's pretty complex setup because there are many challenges from both sides, especially technological challenges for the merchant, to make sure that all the separate channels are actually working and communicating and actually bringing the quality outcome. And of course, it's back to the topic of data, because as Frank mentioned, if you browse on your PC and somebody browse and you browse on your phone, and if a merchant or retail in the shop, they don't know what you've been doing, they can't really help you when you come to the shop and tell your name. So all that, I would say, it's really huge work in progress, but COVID really pushes into it. That's why we see on the market a lot of different initiatives or products within the omni-channel-like experience, which could be like click and collect, or click and reserve, or scan and pay. On the merchant side, there are one line of challenges. It could be connected to logistics, to the data, to processing the data, to connecting the dots. And on the other hand, for the consumers, we are all different. We have different habits, different needs. And we're also navigating between all possible channels and trying to figure it out what is the best for us. And of course, many other retail issues like tracking products within logistic piece, which is part in progress, how they could be delivered, return pieces. So all that, it's pain points on retail.
And I think, what's interesting there, as you mentioned, of course, that making omnichannel work is not just about the happy path, as I call it. I find a product, I buy a product, I receive a product, but also things like returns or cancelling or changing an order. All of those things have to work as well. And I also think it's quite interesting hearing from both of you, because I think you've emphasised what the benefits of omnichannel are for the consumer and for retailers. And it reminds me that in Navigating Digital Payments, we really formed the whole document around the idea that customer experience was key, and ultimately the trends that will be important in payments are the trends that are going to help provide better customer experiences. So I guess we've established what omnichannel is and what some of the benefits are. And Ina, you started to talk about some of the challenges. Frank, do you have a view on what some of the other challenges are for retailers who want to implement a really good omni-channel experience?
Sure. We have a lot of conversations about that. So the primary channel is trust, right? So as a consumer, obviously when I'm in store, it's fairly easy. When I'm shopping online, actually I need to be reassured that I am in the right place. This is not the impersonation of where I want to go and so on. That's one building block. Then I got assured that the environment I'm in knows I am me, right? So it needs to identify myself because I'm going to end up spending money there. And I also need to be sure that when I'm not basically shopping, whoever tries to enter as me will be rejected as me, right? So that's the components trust is building up. The other challenge is around data. So data on one side means the ability for the shop or the retailer to use my data to good avail, but also to ensure that my data will be safeguarded as consumer, right? That feeds back into the prior thing about trust. So be able to use it, but safeguard at the same time. The other thing is convenience, right? So whatever you do, okay, you got to create trust and so on. And that's what, on one hand, you need to kind of enable an invisible security so that it stays fluid. At the same time, you got to avoid, and that leads back to opti-channel, information overload, right? That's part of the convenience, else you're going to lose your consumers. A big channel is basically conversion. That's the first time acquisition of a client. So there's a huge design attitude one needs to have towards that. And there are two building blocks there overall on these challenges. One is the identification phase, which we'll probably talk a bit more later. You got to make sure you can identify a client in a secure and fluid manner, but which is the entry point in a certain way. That doesn't necessarily mean that you need to front load it, but it's an entry point. The other thing is the payment phase, right? This is often the most cumbersome, unpleasant, and actually at the same time the most risky phase in this whole. And anybody who can help basically a retail enable a payment phase that's fluid and kind of easy for a client. I mean, what happens real life? So while I'm in there in a shop, again, this is whether it's a virtual, a metaverse, or any shop, in the selection process, usually I'm the center of universe, everybody caters for me, and I go to the cash desk and suddenly I stand in line. So it's a total inversion of my client experience, right? That's in a supermarket, suddenly I become, somebody standing in line. 5 minutes before, I was being serviced, right? And when I'm an online shop, suddenly the same stuff happens, right? Need to enter stuff and things like this. So this is a huge challenge because it's kind of a huge break-off point or drop-off points for certain consumer. If identification is too cumbersome, they drop off. Right? And there are clear statistics, especially in online shopping, right? And if the payment becomes too cumbersome, they drop off. They go somewhere else. It's too complicated and so on. So there are these overall challenges I mentioned. There are these challenges in the journey that are really very important. If you get them wrong, you lose the clients, right? And overall, I also mentioned that what the retailers need to do is ingrain the tendencies. So if you look at the W3C and FIDO consortium or the PSD2 regulation that comes out, they both point out cross-Atlantic or worldwide to strong client authentication. It means that the password identification is just fading away. It's not what you want to do. You want to do a combination of different things. Somebody the client has, something they are, so this is biometrics, and something they know, which could be a password or something else. This is clearly a tendency that you need to ingrain.
And I think what's fascinating in what you're saying, Frank, is that so it all hinges around trust, but at the same time, you want to implement that trust with the minimum of friction. And sometimes the two feel like they're competing against each other, because of course you can have the most secure system in the world would be one that no one can access, but that's not the result you want when you want people to place orders and buy things from you. So I'd really like to hear from you how you've seen retailers addressing this trust challenge, and also I want to come on to this question of what converts a browser to a buyer ultimately. But before we do that, let me just remind people that if they want to contact us, you can write in via email. Just send it to ndp-podcast@worldline.com. We're always interested in any feedback you have, or if you have topics you'd like us to discuss on the podcast. And also a quick reminder to please take a moment and subscribe to the podcast and leave us a rating and a review. So Frank, coming back to this point then, how have you seen retailers addressing this challenge of enabling trust on these omni-channel journeys whilst minimizing any friction for the consumers?
The first basic layer is to ensure a cybersecurity for all channels, right? That's the basic infrastructure you need to operate with. But basically, most people that we work with, they have discussions with us about ID verification and validation, right? What does that mean? It can turn around ID doc, basically collection. It could be through cameras, upload. There are NFC chips now in ID documents that allow you to collect the information in a more automated and complete manner. Another building block is biometrics. So you want to have the face, fingerprints, the voice, and other elements. So here you got to choose the right biometric for the right environment. I mean, if you're online with the phone and so on, facial biometrics may work very well. Now that we're entering the metaverse, we know that's actually not going to work because you want to see anything but your face. You want to be an avatar, right? So you want to be the dream of yourself, not yourself, basically, or the augmented self. So the biometric fingerprint that's remaining is basically your voice. There is retina. And even if we come back to the face, there are different ways of signing off with something. So, for example, the zone around your mouth is one of the zones that has most muscles. So certain providers use a smile as a signature because it's actually super precise, right? But there are also then behavioral kind of identifications that look at you dynamically, so not only at one point in time, based on how you behave, and there's also things like device fingerprints which you can use. Is it your usual device? And there's also something like secondary IDs. So increasingly, and that's also pushed by the European Union, we talk about ID wallets. Basically, you will have identified somewhere else once, and you will use that identification that's engraved in the process or integrated to identify yourself, right? Please note, these you can use. At the same time, you always remain responsible towards your clients. So that doesn't mean that you can say this is not my issue anymore. And what is important here is basically to offer broad spectrum. So if I look at ID documents, for example, basically it's important that you use a version where you can have terminals, photo, uploads. So you must give your clients as many options as possible. That's really important because what we have learned, if you assume that client's gonna use one channel because you think it's convenient, you may be totally wrong. They may like something else for whatever reason it is. And you'll have to go with this. And if you don't offer that kind of option, then you're dead in the water very, very quickly. Then another point, I loop back to basically data. So it is important that from scratch, the retailers create a system where they collect data. If you don't collect data, you will not get any proper feedback on which method works best, right? And also, by the way, there are different stages there. So which method worked best at which states for the onboarding during the consumption, but also for the client groups you want to target, right? You may be actually onboarding tons of people who are not your target. If you don't have data, you don't know that. You need to look at where are they dropping off? Where do I need to optimize my process? So you need from scratch to implement basically correct data collection. The other thing that also is important is basically what we call dynamic security. So obviously, we said we want invisible and frictionless security, but depending on the circumstances, you may need more or less security. You don't always need the same process. So to talk very concretely, the same client using the same device fingerprint, buying the same type of product at the same time of day, being in the same geographic environment, you name it in terms of data, may basically require a lower security threshold. Then suddenly, if the same client starts buying totally different stuff, uses a new device, they're suddenly maybe legitimately on vacation in a different place. So that's what I call by dynamic security, right? It's all basically, the whole thing is about a balance. So it's a balance between security and potential dropout rates. You got to ask yourself, okay, if basically I'm a payment service provider or a merchant, what level of fraud am I willing to accept and linked losses am I willing to accept to enhance client convenience and revenue? And that's where a payment service provider and merchant together must probably, right, balance it out and decide where they want to go. But because the reality is zero is very seldom. So what we see is basically that what we call civil identity is basically being pushed in the background by digital identity. So increasingly people want to use an identity based on what their digital footprint is and not necessarily some kind of classic ID they carry or increasingly do not carry around anymore because it's virtually put in their mobile phone. And what is important also is the remember me phenomenon. So if you can somehow validate that the client is a returning client and have a minimal demand in terms of identifying them, that's very appreciated by clients because they feel home in a certain sense. If I gotta redo the whole process like my first conversion, it doesn't fly, right? So you need to design the process in accordance with that. And if I take some outlook, we have recently seen a lot of people in the retail space that are preparing for the metaverse because the Generation Z and after is increasingly using that environment and they're shopping. I mean, in certain environments, 70% of them are shopping, right? That's one thing they're preparing for. And the other thing they're preparing for too are wearables. So people will have something they wear that it could be only a watch, by the way, right? That's going to be used to identify themselves and to consume.
It's definitely clear that data is a very important element, and you, Frank, well highlighted the importance from the company's perspective, but from the end user, from the consumer, also research is showing that we are not ready to just give away our data, but we are more open to share our data if we get a return personalized service or personalized product or offer. So there is a huge correlation between the personal attitudes towards data if they get something back on return. And it shows like up to 68% of customers, if they use successfully omni-channel experience, they're coming back to the same channels and to the same brands. So yes, from the side of consumer, we also observe absolutely the same direction towards the use of the data. And it's a place where companies have to play really carefully and thoughtfully.
Totally, I mean, there have been experiments made in various countries, obviously accounting for data protection issues of people being in store, and they're basically, if you can be tracked based on facial biometrics in store, you can enable an experience where I just walk out of there without having to wait to pay. Right? And if you can use a person's data, let's say for 30 minutes while they're there, well, there may be no verification needed because the probability of you being you is just so high, right? That you get a message from your phone saying, you know what, this is what you have in your basket. You'll want to walk out. This is we'll send you the bill and you're done. And this is to your point. This is value for a lot of customers, right? If you're like a family person on Friday night, the kids are waiting home, you need to get that food now, and you don't have to wait in line. So guess what? Film me, by all means do it, right? CCTV is on the street anyway, and that way can run out of here and save 5 to 10 minutes instead of paying. Totally aligned. I see a lot of buy-in from clients if they see value in the data, yeah.
And another proof for the trust between consumers and retailers and merchants is what consumers expect, or they grow their trust when they have constant engagement from the side of the brands or companies. So then they feel more aligned to do something with that kind of brand.
The other point is also what I call relevance, right? You talked about personalized. So yes, less interaction, but once the system through data collection knows who you are and you're being pinged on something, whether on your mobile phone or anywhere else that is relevant to you, then you create a stronger connection. And that means you're also more willing to look at other stuff that you may consume in that universe, basically. And that can only be obtained by one, making sure that the system knows who you are, but also knowing you, basically, right? Saying, okay, this is what you actually desire. So not a lot of noise, but less noise, but maybe more relevant information for you.
The other thing I really liked, Frank, in your answer earlier was what you said about treating returning customers differently, because it reminds me of kind of when I was growing up as a small child, and in the village there was a shop with one shopkeeper, and of course if you walked in as a stranger, then he would expect that you pay in full, and there would be a low level of trust. But of course, as he saw you every day and knew you were reliable, then the trust would grow between you. So I think it's kind of trying to emulate that in the digital world, isn't it? That you don't naturally treat someone that you've never met before the same as someone who you've known for years. And as someone proves that they're reliable over and over again, you can afford to reduce your kind of checks and be a bit more trusting. Probably the same applies with kind of offering credit or other services at checkout.
You're putting the finger on something extremely important, because it's the dimensions of what payment means. So often people say payment is pay now, right? But actually, if you know and your client that well, as you say, in different channels, payment can be transformed into, as you say, well, why don't you pay in 3 steps, right? Or in 4 steps, or things like this. And it's an add-on, basically. So payment can be transformed because you know your client. And that can be, again, built on 2 things. It can build on, I have a history with that client because I have been tracking that client, and therefore I can offer this, what I call enhanced payment option, right? Not just a unidimensional, but it can be basically based on circumstances, depending on the product, the time of the year, and so on. Say, actually, maybe it will be convenient for you to walk out of here because we identify yourself, and you'll pay in 3 or 4 times, and that for that product, and because at that period of the year that might be ideal. So actually, if you design a good client journey where you have, as I say, the dynamic identity and the identity in time, right? A digital footprint. Identity becomes a digital footprint in a certain sense. It allows you to, kind of promote enhanced payment options for those clients.
Really fascinating. It's such a fascinating topic to be discussing with both of you. I do want to come right back to that initial question we had. Maybe Ina, I start with you. So if you had to name 1 or 2 key drivers that really make the difference between someone browsing online or browsing in a shop and converting to a buyer, what would you say? What would you say they are?
Probably I could give an example how our partners actually increase their revenue from. So nowadays we see the fast food restaurant are growing, and some of our partners installing kiosk providers. So when in normal day you go to one of the fast food restaurants, they give you an offer. You can have burger, or you can have a package for lunch, and it's discount because of weekend or for family, etc. So when they have time and ability, you know all information. But when there are a lot of people, seller cannot tell you all the time the same. So they're kind of losing ability to get undertaking revenue. But when you have a kiosk and when it's visualized, present, different options, the packages, the drinks, the extra dessert, etc. So that we see that the upsell increase the revenue between 20 to 28% on a regular day. So this is a clear example how to use different channel, omni-channel, within one in-store shop where everybody could benefit. So I am, as a consumer, going to be satisfied by having this option. So I'm happy to pay more. And the merchant going to be satisfied by the increase of revenue. So for me, there is clearly a link. It's definitely a way forward. A lot of things needs to be done, as Frank clearly mentioned, about the data and use of the data and security and benefiting of all of it. But I believe we're on an interesting journey on that side.
And Frank, if I come to you then finally, what would you say are the main drivers that persuade someone in the end to buy something rather than just browsing online or browsing in a physical store?
The key drivers I see for basically retailers or service providers for clients, one of them is comfort. Very often underestimated. It's got to be a comfortable environment. That means I must feel this is a trusted environment, but also I can easily orient myself in there. Right? That's a very important base layer for everything. We talked about a product convenience. It's got to flow by itself. I don't have to think a lot. We alluded to personalization. So what's being thrown at me is relevant, i.e. it's my path, the one I like, and it's the information I can use. But at the same time, I think that if you want to, this is the base layer, so to speak, the 3 base layers. But if you want to be successful and maybe stand out and have a comparative advantage, you should bear in mind that you should try and take the risk to surprise your client, right? Make proposals, positive surprises that they don't expect, the right voucher at the same time, the right payment option at the right time, things like this. This is really important if you want to differentiate yourself and you don't want to be like everybody else. And this is something you can only achieve by having proper data, knowing how to use it, and always being sure actually you talk to the right person, right? If you don't, that's not going to fly. Which means the underlying system you must build is a system of constant feedback loop that will keep optimizing the client experience and basically the client satisfaction, because only a satisfied client is going to come back and want more from you.
Thank you, Frank and Ina. Maybe if I try and very briefly summarize this quite wide-ranging discussion, I think it was really good at the start to be clear about what we mean by omni-channel and also multi-channel and opti-channel. I think it was quite clear that omni-channel can really boost the customer experience and therefore it makes life easier and better for consumers, but also boost revenues for retailers because that convenience is valued and it leads to higher conversion rates. And then I think it was interesting in the discussion about challenges that we focused a lot on trust, but I think also personalization really came out. And that could be, as you said, Frank, about the personalization of authentication, so treating people different if they're returning to if they're there the first time. But also, as you said, right in the last answer, this and Ina, you mentioned it earlier as well, but providing things, surprising your customers in a positive way. This is all about kind of using the knowledge you have about them across all the channels they're using to provide something surprising, exciting, unique to them that they get some value from and that they appreciate. So really fascinating discussion. Really appreciate you both joining us. So Frank, thank you so much.
My pleasure, David. I found this discussion extremely inspiring. And thank you also, Ina. Thank you.
And yes, I was going to say to Ina, always a great pleasure to have you joining us on Navigating Digital Payments.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. It's always nice to have a interesting exchange on some topics like omni-channel.
And that just leaves me finally, of course, to thank you, our dear listener, for joining us again for this episode of Navigating Digital Payments.
Thank you for listening to the Navigating Digital Payments podcast, brought to you by Worldline. Join us next time to learn more about the latest innovations, trends, and predictions for the future of payments.